The night the dragon baby crawled from the frozen forest, the world should have ended, but, instead, it began with a sound. So weak that even the snow seemed ashamed to hear it. Hoon was walking home through the white silence carrying empty hopes and colder memories. When that sound reached him and stopped his feet, it was not a roar or a threat, it was the sound of something breaking quietly. He followed it and found a small body, half buried in snow-blue scales, cracked eyes, dim wings, torn and shaking as if the cold itself was eating it alive. The dragon baby lifted its head with effort and looked at the boy as if looking at the last light in a dying sky. "Shelter," the dragon whispered, and the word felt heavier than any blade Owen had ever seen. Yuen was alone in the village long before this moment, a child without parents, without protection, without a future anyone cared about. People said dragons took everything from humans, and humans took everything from dragons, and there was no space left for mercy. Yuen had learned to survive by being small, by being silent, by never choosing anything. But now, a choice was kneeling in front of him, bleeding, freezing, and afraid. The dragon baby collapsed, and its breathing slowed each breath. A fragile promise that might break at any second. Un dropped his bundle and reached out even though every story he knew screamed that this was wrong. His hands burned with cold when he touched the dragon, and the pain told him it was real. He pulled the dragon into his arms and felt how light it was, how empty with hunger and loss. He carried it toward the ruins of his old home, where fire once lived, and now only ash remained inside. The broken walls he hid the dragon beneath old boards, and wrapped it with the only cloth he owned. The dragon watched him with eyes that did not trust kindness, yet needed it more than life. Outside the wind howled like the voices of the dead, and Ewan sat awake all night, pressing his warmth against the dragon and whispering words he had never heard anyone say to him: "Stay alive." Morning came with soldiers. They came with iron and fire and laws written by kings, who never froze and never begged. They searched the snow and found tracks and followed them to Wuan. They asked him questions and he gave them silence. They hit him and he tasted blood, and still he said nothing. The dragon did not move, and Wuan learned that pain could be a shield. That night the dragon spoke again. "Why did you help me?" it asked. "Because you asked." Un said. The dragon was quiet for a long time, and then said, "No one ever chooses us." It told him about the curse, about being born weak in a world that hunted strength, about being left behind so the strong could survive. Uan understood because he had lived the same story without scales or fire. Days passed, and the dragon healed slowly, but its wings would never be whole. The village grew colder toward Uan. They called him cursed like his parents, like the wars, like the past they wanted to forget. When the shed burned, it burned fast and bright, and the smoke filled Aaron's lungs before he could run. The dragon screamed, and the sound froze. The fire turned flame into crystal and shattered. The night soldiers returned. With fear in their eyes and weapons ready, the dragon stood between them and Yuan, taller, stronger, but still afraid. The king came with words sharper than swords. "That creature will destroy us," he said. The dragon lowered its head and said, "We were bound so humans could rule without fear." Un stepped forward even as his knees shook. "Then take me instead," he said. The ground broke, the sky opened, and power older than memory answered. The king shouted that the boy would die. Un looked at the dragon and smiled. "I am not afraid." Light and cold and fire became one. Un fell. The dragon caught him and poured everything it had into keeping him alive. When morning came, the king was gone, and the soldiers fled. Uan lived, the dragons stayed together. They walked into a future neither was meant to have. They traveled across frozen valleys and silent ruins, learning each other in slow, careful days. Yuan learned that the dragon was called Iriel, and that its fire once sang instead of burned Iriel. Learned that Uan had buried his parents with his own hands, and never cried, because tears froze on his face. They met fear in many forms: villages that shut doors, hunters who raised bows, priests who whispered curses each time Uan stood in front of Iriel, and each time Iriel bent its power smaller, so the boy would not be seen as a monster keeper. One night Iriel confessed that breaking the seal had bound their lives together. If one fell, the other would follow. Iriel accepted this bond as simply another truth. When winter ended, they reached the edge of the old kingdoms, where stones remembered older wars. There the curse returned stronger, and Iriel began to fade, its scales dull its breath. Shallow the magic demanded a price Un offered, himself again stepping into the ancient circle, where kings once sacrificed dragons. He spoke not to gods, but to the world itself. Take my fear, take my loneliness, take my ending, but let this life continue. The circle answered with silence, and then, with pain, unfelt memories, tear away moments of warmth, dreams of rest, the idea that he deserved more. Iriel screamed, and wrapped Uin in its wings, refusing to let go the power, shifted the curse broke differently. Uin did not die, but he changed. When he opened his eyes, his heart burned with shared fire and shared sorrow. He could feel Iriel breathe, even when they were apart. They returned to the valley, where the story had begun, and built something new. People came slowly at first with fear, and then with need. Un healed with his hands warm as flame, gentle as snow. Iriel guarded the skies, not as a tyrant, but as a promise. Children stopped throwing stones, and started asking questions. Years passed, songs replaced warnings. The world learned that mercy could rewrite fate, and when another weak voice cried from the cold Uin, and Uriel answered together, the bond deepened through seasons of loss and fragile hope. Uin sometimes dreamed of the boy he was, and woke feeling older than mountains. Iriel sometimes stared at the stars, remembering a sky it once owned. They faced a betrayal when a trusted elder sold their location for gold. Armies marched and fire fell, and the valley burned. Un stood alone on the bridge buying time, with nothing. But his voice, he spoke of shelter of choices, of a world where the small were not erased. Arrows struck him, and he fell into the river below. Iriel believed him dead, and unleashed a grief that split clouds and stone. At the edge of annihilation, Unin surfaced alive, pulled by the bond. Seeing him, the armies broke and fled in the aftermath. Uin wept for the first time, not from pain but from release. He learned that strength could be gentle and still. Unbreakable. Iriel learned that power meant nothing without someone to protect. When age finally touched Uin, his hair silvered and his steps slowed. Iriel grew vast and wise and patient. On the final winter night, Uin sat by the fire and told the dragon to live on. Iriel bowed and promised to guard the world in his name. When Uin passed, the valley felt quiet, but not empty. Every shelter built, every child saved, carried his echo. And somewhere beyond fear, a dragon watched over humanity, remembering the boy who chose kindness long after. Stories changed and names blurred. The lesson remained: power answered compassion. Before cruelty, shelter mattered more than victory. A single choice in the cold could reshape everything. Those who heard the tale felt something stir, a reminder that monsters were often mirrors, and that hope survived where someone stayed. The dragon still circles the frozen forest, waiting, listening, because somewhere another voice may whisper, "Shelter, and the world will begin again." They said. Storms bent away. From a certain valley, they said, lost children dreamed of blue fire, guiding them home. Unin had become a story that taught courage without hatred. Iriel had become a shadow of safety across the sky. When fear rose again in distant lands, the dragon flew not to burn but to stand. Kings learned that threats meant little against unity. The world did not become perfect, but it became kinder, and kindness spread like fire that healed instead of harmed. At the edge of memory, elders taught children to listen for weak voices, to question the stories that demanded blood, to remember that the smallest lives often carried the greatest truths. The dragon baby who begged became a symbol of endings and beginnings, and the human boy who answered became proof that fate could be refused. Together their bond rewrote history. Without erasing pain, it honored it. And in honoring it, the world learned to heal. Snow still falls where it all began, but it no longer feels empty. Footprints cross without fear. Fires burn without smoke of war, and in the hush before dawn, if one listens closely, there is a sense of being watched with care. Not judged, not hunted, simply held. This is not a legend of victory, it is a memory of choice, of a night when a boy stopped walking and chose to stay, and because he stayed the world learned how to breathe again. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a young traveler kneels in snow, hearing a sound that does not belong to the wind, and the cycle waits, because stories do not end. They move, they wait, they ask, and someone always answers, even when the world says do not, even when fear says run, even when history says burn. There is always a choice, and that choice can change everything forever if someone is brave enough to stay and kind enough to choose shelter when it matters most. That is how worlds are saved. One quiet choice at a time, in the cold together always.